everyone, I'm Contessa Brewer. With just 4 days to go until the New Hampshire primary, a new poll shows Marco Rubio closing the gap between him and the presumed frontrunner, Donald Trump. According to a CNN WMUR poll released today, Rubio has climbed to 18%, up 7 points since before the Iowa caucus. There are still a lot of votes up for grabs, though. In fact, nearly 6 in 10 New Hampshire Republicans say they are still undecided this close to the primary. Nationally, Donald Trump still holds the lead at 31%, with Ted Cruz in second place at 22% and Rubio not far behind at 19%. On the Democratic front, Hillary Clinton just barely leads rival Bernie Sanders. She's now at 44%, a far cry from her 61 to 30% lead over Sanders in December. We spoke with Chief White House Correspondent Major Garrett about the latest polls and the state of the race in New Hampshire.
Give you some historical statistics that shows you how volatile things can be here in New Hampshire and how much this polling data suggests trends but does not necessarily predict outcomes. Historically in New Hampshire, among Republicans, 20% can be undecided on the day of the primary, and historically, brace yourself for this, 12% of Republicans have, over time, decided while standing on line at the polling place. 12%. Can you imagine that? You're in line at Derry or Londonderry or Manchester, Nashua, or someplace like that. You're in line for an hour. You can change your mind as you get closer to the primary polling place itself. So that shows you the kind of volatility here. And I've talked to a lot of Republican consultants, people who are close to this process, historical observers here. They say two things are very important. Trump is in the lead, but this volatility is a bad sign for him. Marco Rubio is rising, but Rubio has not built the sustained ground operation in New Hampshire that could really put him in a position to capitalize on this momentum. And it is still a dogfight between Jeb Bush, John Kasich, Ted Cruz, and Chris Christie right along there with Rubio and Trump.
Chris Christie's losing ground. He's lost about 5% in this same poll, and perhaps Marco Rubio is taking advantage of that. When we look at Donald Trump, though, there's another number I think is very telling. His unlikability among New Hampshire Republicans is going up. 37% now say they would never, ever vote for Trump. That's up 6 points from the previous poll.
Right. These are two things that work into Trump's disadvantage right now. You had it right, disfavorability, or the people who are not willing to vote for him under any circumstances, that's rising. His poll numbers overall are dropping, and there's all this volatility. And there's the loss in Iowa that takes away some of the aura of invincibility that Trump has tried to create around his candidacy from the very beginning. All of these are not necessarily fatal signs, but they create an unhappy mix beneath the Trump campaign. And it is worth pointing out the Trump campaign has not invested heavily in a ground operation here either. The two candidates who are currently leading in New Hampshire have the least significant and the least visible and the least effective ground games, Trump and Marco Rubio. Who does have real ground games here? Operations with volunteers, phone banks, door knockers, Ted Cruz, Jeb Bush, and John Kasich. Chris Christie doesn't either, and he's falling in the polls because as soon as Rubio got here, Christie went after him in a very personal way that looks to be working against him. So the people to keep eyes on for that second and third spot, Kasich, Jeb Bush, and Ted Cruz.
Well, it occurs to me that they must not be very concerned about having Ted Cruz or Donald Trump as the party's nomination if they're willing to take on the establishment candidate who's doing better. Let's talk about the Democrats, shall we?
Sure.
The race is tightening incredibly between Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders, and not just in New Hampshire. We're talking about nationally, only about 2 points within the margin of these error for these polls. How much is riding on New Hampshire? Does it still maintain the same kind of importance that Iowa did?
Sure. New Hampshire is going to be an important place for both Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton to send a signal to Democrats around the country about how long this race is going to go on. Look, Bernie Sanders has a substantial lead here. Hillary Clinton has sort of suggested it's so substantial she had been advised to sort of skip New Hampshire as if that was an option. It never was. And it sort of forgets the history of the Clintons in New Hampshire, which is substantial and has been consistent with Clintons performing very well in this state. So I always consider New Hampshire a place, if there's a Clinton on the ballot, it's going to be close. The most important thing I think that came out of last night's debate, the first time that both Sanders and Clinton faced each other, just the two of them on stage, is on a national perspective that elevated the stature of Bernie Sanders because he stood toe-to-toe with Hillary Clinton and gave as good as he got. Here in New Hampshire, it probably didn't have much effect because if you're a Sanders supporter, you saw plenty last night to keep you right there with Bernie. And if you're a Hillary supporter, you saw plenty last night to keep you there. But nationally, it sent a signal. This is a real race. Sanders can hold his own against Hillary Clinton. I think that's probably the biggest takeaway from last night's televised debate.